Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Patrick Lovell Truth Bomb riff. I'm coming at you at approximately 1 p.m. on Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024, amidst a whole lot of activity. And I suppose I've been giving this truth bomb a lot of thought for some time, kind of imagining if I could find the sweet spot to deliver the mother of all truth bombs. But it looks like just the happenings and goings on of the circumstances of our country writ large have done a vast majority of the heavy lifting for me. I just have to reiterate once again why what I'm revealing to you is the ultimate, you got to be kidding me, or the ultimate WTF, or the ultimate, okay, now I totally get it. And I've got to drop this into kind of, if I think about this, again, if you're new to this, welcome. This is something I've been doing for about 2.5 years. You can find, if you find yourself interested in seeing where I've been coming from, like I said just a moment ago, this is my 502nd Truth Bomb riff, which are part lecture, part sermon, part self-help therapy. Because I am an investigative journalist. I'm a muckraking journalist. I'm a guy that produced a game-changing television series that gives you the blueprint for what the entire system of power that I'm about to unpack has to prevent you from knowing. It's like any movie you've ever seen. It's like any novel you've ever, or book that is a murder mystery or an investigation into power or into something where someone has a conspiracy that is covering up that which enables that to run. If you're of my generation, it's very much a Scooby-Doo episode, but in a very significant way. And I'm all out of Scooby snacks, so hopefully I'll be able to make this brief because we've all got stuff to do. But hopefully this is something that you might revisit from time to time. And for those of you who have been watching me forever, thank you. I really deeply appreciate it. But we've kind of arrived at a moment that, you know, if I've ever asked you to jump on board, which I do with every hashtag if you follow me on Twitter, but I'm growing fast and furious. And quite frankly, I think I've seen my numbers on Twitter, aka X, jump by over 2,000 followers. And I hate to call people that are real and like me, who love the arts and dogs and orcas and the world and science and technology and ways to figure out problems and history, and you love just to be engaged in the world and you're proactive and a dynamic person. I hate to refer to you as a follower. You're not a follower. You're a fellow journeyman on this pathway to hopefully turning the tables on the corruption that is murdering everything in every way. But yeah, there are tricks to the trade that many of us are aware of as it relates to social media. And I came up against it this morning, right when I was about to get all sorts of traction. But I find the timing interesting. And I also find it, potentially opportunistic, depending on how you respond. And for those of you probably looking at me like, hey, Patrick, the last time I saw you, your hair was starting to come back and you went through chemo and you lost all your hair, but what's the story? If you are thinking about that, I did, for those of you who are men, who are middle-aged and who do have to deal with shaving your head from time to time, it's a lot harder than it looks. And I chose to do it right before this truth bomb riff because my hair was growing back this kind of Linus from Charlie Brown situation. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of like in that in-between stage. So I'll probably grow my hair back as we get closer to the fall. But for the moment, I'm going to go with this look because quite frankly, it's easy. I just contradicted myself. It's hard to cut it, but it's easy once you do. I don't know. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. But so I got to separate this truth bomb into three buckets. And because we're all dealing with this. And if you're on X, you know that people respond to things a million times a second and it has your head like a pinball all over the place, or some people like to refer to as a squirrel when many of us have little bandwidth. And a lot of the times what I'm revealing has a lot of information. So it's difficult for those who might be on the right side of this and want to be, on the journey with those who already are, towards the end game of what I'm laying out here. And if you're one of those people with really short bandwidth, I'm just going to cut to the chase. Look, I have the answers that can take out the corruption that has completely betrayed everything the United States is supposed to be and has a complete iron grasp on control of power through a bunch of different methodologies of maneuverings that have really evolved over a very long time. And I know who the bad guys are. I know what they got away with. I know what they're doing, and I know how to defeat them. So if you believe in liberty and justice for all, if you believe in integrity, if you believe in the dynamism of an equal and a fair market and playing field of ideas and opportunities, then you're going to want to join me. And you got to think of it like a scrum or, in rugby or a football game where we have to shove the truth that I have down the throats of the powerful who are playing everybody for the fool. So if you need to bail out now, just know I have the answers and the know-how once we get millions of people. So if that's enough for you, hey, hit the eject button and take off, and hopefully I'll see you downstream in some manner, way, shape, or form, especially if I'm able to galvanize what we might call a base. Those who actually know how to read, pay attention, who understands how things are supposed to work, and are beyond themselves at the moment, given what we now know they're working for and how. And so the three different buckets that I have to address are what's on everybody's mind. Obviously, all things Joe Biden after that monstrous debate, which was hard. It was very hard. Like I've said all over social media, particularly X, just X. That's really all I'm doing in terms of social media. But I'd vote for a dead Joe Biden over Donald Trump, and twice on Sunday. But yeah, everybody is thinking now, and I'm seeing this through the mainstream press, and it's on the front page of the New York Times today, and a lot of, let's call it mainstream vectors of media are, that might be on the Democratic side, aka Joe Biden and so forth. They're really hand wringing, and they're really trying to figure out what comes next, and they're really figuring out whether or not, and this is primarily, I believe, driven by the donors, whether or not Joe Biden should step down, given what we all saw. Obviously, as I've mentioned in a previous Truth Bomb, that Joe Biden knocked it out of the park during the State of the Union address, however many months ago that was. But in this particular circumstance, the way he looked on stage with all of the train wreck of lies that Donald Trump was able to get away with because of the nature of supposedly the format, but also the failure of Donna Bash and Jake Tapper and CNN writ large, which I need to address. And what's kind of difficult about these truth bombs is their stream of consciousness. So you just have to go with the flow, because I didn't write this out because nobody wants to read, because they either engage in all of these other sorts of challenges of communication, particularly in the immediate sort of do you get it or do you not sort of scenario, and considering the information that I have. So CNN, I happen to react to a Brian Stelter, if that's how you pronounce his name, or is it Stelter? I think I always get confused how you pronounce his name, but the kind of nauseating, fat, bald Jewish guy that's been sort of the go-to dude on all things assessment for CNN and what was his television show, Reliable Sources, for a very long time until they let him go, where he's like this sort of voice and asking these, questions about how people are responding to things and how power is looking at things. And it gives them a vehicle to be able to transmit some ridiculous ideas that he's kind of manipulating in the whole thing. And I said on X this morning, after I've had tons and tons of momentum, like I said at the outset, probably have increased followers, which I consider partners that we're going to unite together on this massive, adventure odyssey that's going to become a tidal wave crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism it fuels, that I call hashtag the MAGA zombie apocalypse. But Stelter is all over my feed on X for some reason this morning. And, he's all in on whether or not Biden should step down. I mean, that's kind of his go-to thing because everybody's talking about it, and he can kind of, get inside the algorithms and pump up, what his sort of awareness is out there because of just how the whole thing works. And, he's basically making all of these sort of assessments that to me are just like everything else he's ever done, surface, meaningless and not useful. And so I said to Stellar on my feed or his feed, I said, look, Brian, here's the thing, dude. You and your network are responsible for Trump. Now we know that because the former president of the CNN network, who's no longer there, the guy, Jeff Zucker, famously alongside the former CEO of Viacom, are on the record saying, yeah, we pumped Trump. Kind of funny. So did Stormy Daniels, and I'll get to that in a moment, because that's one of my three buckets that I want to address. But they said Trump was good for ratings, and they played roulette with our democracy. And then Trump turned the tables on him and started bloviating fake media, and he was never wrong about that, particularly mainstream media and the likes of Brian Stetler, who are nothing. And I said, you should be tarred and feathered, and you should be ashamed, and you have no credibility. And then I moved on. Immediately, I get flagged by X, and they say that I had engaged in violent speech, and so that they were going to put me in the X jail on the sidelines for a week. And I think that's to slow down this massive momentum that I've had, because I've realized over the course of the last 3 weeks or so, I'm connecting finally with real people. When I first started really making a move on X, because of all of the things that I've said in the past on these truth bombs, I did so because at least it was an appropriate place to engage in the, shall we say, hostile political rhetoric. But I thought initially when Elon took over that there was going to be an opportunity for everybody to have the equal amount of speech. And I felt very confident in my arguments that once people started to latch on, it would grow exponentially. And I'd finally reach the audience that mainstream media pillow choked me 3 years ago when we released our work, The Con, that you can find for free, because all the American people buy our lies, at www.thecon.tv, which is the blueprint for the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, which is why you want to listen to me. But it's also just the first step, to be quite frank with you. And it led to a podcast that I had to do because of all of the information, because of all entities, Blackrock, the most powerful company in the world, which is now an extension of the United States, which does have a lot to do with the Biden administration, which I'll circle back to in a moment. But they basically, after the 2008 great financial crisis, because of the information I reveal, which I'm the only person in the country, and to my knowledge in the world, that knows what happened, is willing to talk about it. That Federal Reserve Act 13.3, and this is the most important thing you're going to hear now, today, tomorrow, 3 months from now, whenever it finally sinks in, whether or not I'm still trying to make the effort or I've disappeared for whatever reason, because I think I have definitely made the attention of a lot of bad guys, I'll tell you that. But Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, which a lot of people think of as the housing collapse based on subprime. And there's a lot to that. And there's misnomers in terms of language. And for those of you who understand Orwell, you'll understand doublespeak. And I can just infer that at the moment and maybe address it later. Or you can find it in one of my 502 truth bombs on Patrick Lovell Truth Bomb Riffs the Con on YouTube, by the way, which I don't get censored on YouTube, thank goodness, because these are straightforward. But going back to what this comment on Brian Stetler, former guy from CNN, if you don't know who he is, who's just a freaking nauseating fool, who does kind of look like me with his hair at least, but he's got sideburns, whatever. And I made this statement again that you should be tarred and feathered, which is just turn a phrase from some, I guess, activity that I remember from Mark Twain, going back to Brer Rabbit, which isn't Mark Twain, but the idea of Brer Rabbit, and ultimately, 100 years ago, like before the Civil War, probably, I think, is when that actually practice was a custom, if you will. Not something that's actually used in intent. It's a phrase. It's a turn of speech. It's a reference. It's not an actual threat. Meanwhile, I have observed, and I'm sure millions of you have observed this as well, that on a daily basis, whether it's Alex Jones, whether it's Tucker Carlson, whether it's, I'm going to say, even Russell Brand kind of gets close, but it doesn't matter. MAGAs all over the place, or maggots as we like to call them. Particularly Lauren Hobart. Just kidding, Hobart, or is it Hobart? Yeah, and everybody's favorite horse riding, CrossFit, woman who obviously has never spent a day in her life actually being involved with writing a bill or understanding the history of Congress or anything else, who just happens to be there so that she can be used to bloviate all sorts of drivel like a volcano of lies. And I'm referring to none other, and say it with me, Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTJ. G. MTG. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. Marjorie Taylor Greene and company, these guys are literally involved with defamation, slander, intimidation, hate speech, violent speech, you name it. I get people who comment on my stuff all the time, which I finally don't even address anymore because I've gotten to this threshold where I'm connecting with the people I want to connect with, not the sex bots for the original, I don't know, 6 months that I was trying to get people's attention on X, because I came to X because all of the other social media still has its own hang-ups as well. And, but as I started taking off on X, lo and behold, here I am, as I revealed in my last truth bomb. And I'd really recommend you guys all check the last 5 truth bombs out, because they're all on point and they say a lot of what is very important to what we have to do moving forward. But I was censored 2 weeks ago, where I learned, looking through like drafts I've just happened to explore on it, that like literally thousands of tweets that I've made did not post. And I've seen tweets disappear. But more importantly, every time I start to get momentum and I start to find people outside again of this stupid universe of sex bots, which are designed to tamper down somebody's amplification of what it is that they're revealing. And I don't know all of the ins and outs of exactly what happens with the algorithm, but I do recall thinking about CNN, what's his name? Don Lemon, right? So Don Lemon ends up being, I think, initially, contracted? Yeah, he was contracted briefly by Elon Musk. And for a minute, he was back in the spotlight because everybody's kind of forgotten about Don Lemon and waved him off and everything else. But there was a moment when he was contracted to be on X. He did this interview with Elon Musk that went sideways. Elon Musk's end up tearing up the contract. But in that interview, which Don Lemon posted, Elon was like, look, we don't moderate content because we have methodologies of turning down what we don't want to get out there, and we amplify what we do. So he had revealed that was the methodology 6 months ago. But over the course of the last month, we have seen what is a Tet offensive of these hate bots, these trolls, this 2.0 version of what this guy Prigozhin, who was Putin's right-hand guy before he turned the tanks around out of Ukraine and went after Moscow, and then ended up getting killed or plane crashed, as we like to say, right? He got suicided, but he got plane crashed, obviously, by daring to go against the outright power of Vladimir Putin. But this guy Prigozhin was running what they called the Internet Research Agency, IRA, back during the 2016 campaign, that the likes of Russell Brand and Tucker Carlson, and of course, my favorite, Matt Taibbi, were all like Russia, 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 which was like, okay, there was no influence and involvement with the 2016 election by Russia. Meanwhile, we know that the Mercers and Cambridge Analytica were one side of this. And I do know that, of course, Mercer is down and, his place in New Zealand, but lives in America. I think he's originally from Germany. I'm not sure what his background was, but obviously made all of his wealth in the United States. And then guys like, who did I just mention besides Mercer? I want to go into Eric Prince and all things J6, but that's a different story. No, Cambridge Analytica, yeah, being a consulting operation out of the UK as well, right? So like in the UK and the United States and Israel, there's good guys and bad guys, by the way, that can play both sides of the fence at the highest levels of tech. And, another side of this, when I think about 2016 and the Trump election and things that happened in the aftermath, I'm reminded of Q, which there was this great Adam McKay executive produced documentary on HBO. I think you could probably still find it, but it revealed all those guys in the dark web that created that stuff that wound up in Philippines, right? And the dark web is all about, this like, I don't know, the worst activities and sexual predation and, playing out stuff that people are into and perverted whatever. But because they were able to operate offshore, they were involved, and they got involved with the whole Q situation. But as that documentary rolled on, it was revealed that there was a lot of former members of guys at the highest levels of the NSA, the National Security Agency, right? These are the guys that know the ins and outs of every aspect of tech that you can imagine in communication, and they were deeply involved with Q. So it had this sort of markings of, like, let's say, mercenaries in the tech sphere, okay? And as I recall, incidentally, they were deeply involved, and now this is an interesting thing for me to consider. They were also deeply involved with Steve Bannon. And of course, we just saw Steve Bannon go to jail the other day, and he's going to be in there for the next 4 months, and he tried to appeal to the Supreme Court, but he was dropped off by none other than Eric Prince. Who was Eric Prince? Eric Prince is the billionaire that created Blackwater, which is this elite mercenary force that ended up, finding the best of the best, trained from probably Navy SEAL Team 6 and other, probably paramilitary operations. No, you don't want to call them paramilitary, because that's what Blackwater is. I'm talking about guys that were trained, in all of the special ops forces in the United States and the UK, by the way. And these guys become like private, muscle for guys in the UAE, and also in where's Hamas? I guess Hamas is in UAE. Anyway, one of the what is the one right next to UAE? So you've got Saudi, you've got Iraq, you've got Kuwait, you've got whatever. The one that where the biggest city is, that I don't know, my mind's swimming. But the bottom line is they were all over the world, providing after, and during, quite frankly, our war on terror over the course of the last 20 years. And a lot of these guys wound up in unmarked vans, and they were doing all sorts of muscle work during the Black Lives Matter protest all over the country that we used to see during the Trump administration, show up in our unmarked vehicles in places like Wisconsin, as I recall, but most notably in Portland. And they were just grabbing protesters who, were Antifa protesters, and like hauling ass with them in the car and dumping them. Who knows what they did? But I mean, I remember former AG during the Trump administration, who of course is this guy that goes back to Contragate and been everybody's favorite double talking like freak, first AG that betrayed this country that I'm aware of, none other than Bill Barr, who of course is Bill Maher's. That sounds like kind of a tongue twister too, but that favorite guest, Bill Maher, right? The so-called token liberal who's also not woke, and, part of the thing that, Elon Musk and he were all about in terms of the woke mind virus. When I've showed you, it's not the woke mind virus that you got to be worried about. It's the MAGA zombie apocalypse. But going back to, where am I going with this? Because there's just so much information. Eric Prince. So Eric Prince drops off Steve Bannon. These guys were associated with NSA during Q, which is all part and parcel of the communications time that led to and was during J6. And so the J6 investigation in Congress, led by Liz Cheney, the daughter of Darth Vader 1.0, Dick Cheney, who gave us all this stuff to begin with, quite frankly, for those of you under the age of 20 who are just starting to come into the real world that we've been living in for at least 2.5 decades. And ultimately, she's like this star because she's a Republican and she has the courage to go against Trump, and she's a woman, and all of the other sort of, optics, if you will. But as I'm watching the J6 investigations like a couple of years ago, I'm like, wait a second, you're telling me that Donald Trump was the mastermind. Donald Trump can't fucking put his shoes on by himself. I mean, obviously, he can swing. And like I said in one of my truth bombs that a lot of people, or not truth bombs, but one of my posts that a lot of people were commenting on this morning that I said the other day, he's a runaway freight train pig running to the, all you can eat buffet during the senior time at Mar-a-Lago as he approaches the presidency. I mean, Donald Trump is a buffoon and a joke and a character beyond comprehension who's not a dictator or a brainchild of, a mastermind of anything. He's a wag the dog fool. The only thing he's been involved with for literally decades, after he was born on third base with $600 million from Papa Fred Trump, who was engaged with all sorts of predation in Queens based on skimming from government contracts for minorities in the boroughs of New York, that made all of his money. So he's a socialist fascist, if you can figure that one out. But he was involved with making America great again, which I've prefaced also on X that, Rachel Maddow did a fantastic podcast that's called Ultra, that I recommend everybody see, because it's all tied to this insanity, because it was news to me, because I was aware of the history in the 20s and the 30s in the United States that came out of Jim Crow, because we've always had a white supremacist sort of population, particularly as it relates to the slavery in the South, of which, of course, I always knew that Adolf Hitler had interest in developing, because he appreciated apparently America's genocide of North American Indians, but he also deeply appreciated Jim Crow, and he adapted a lot of those sort of elements in developing the Nuremberg laws that would ultimately lead to the Holocaust. But as it relates to America First, and what Rachel Maddow would reveal about all of those things is that, and this is what I didn't know, is that the Nazis literally were deeply enmeshed with this America First group that had, KKK rallies in New York. They had a big rally at Madison Square Garden. They were hassling Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time, and FDR met him head on. And he was no friend really of all the minorities. I'll tell you that, even though his wife certainly was. And that's a whole nother, bucket of history. But ultimately, these guys had learned, and I'm talking about Steve Bannon and Eric Prince and whatever their sort of methodologies are, that going back to the 20s and 30s in the United States, that there was this fascist group, this far-right leaning, sort of white supremacist operation, stemming from Jim Crow, that tried to overcome the Congress of the United States and then ultimately the presidency, and they were thwarted. And then ultimately the Nazis were too, because of World War II. But I didn't realize there was literally direct involvement and payments and, assistance and all of those sorts of things, that I think Putin is doing the exact same thing right now. But the guys that were deeply involved with it, and this is the mistake of Congress and Liz Cheney in the investigation, is that they wanted to put the whole thing on Donald Trump. Again, Donald Trump, the only thing he could have potentially, conceivably, in my opinion, come up with was like, well, wow, I've been using falsifying business records in my business dealings for my entire career. I've used it to skirt taxes. I've used it to create shell companies. I've used it to lie about square footage in my penthouse to get loans. Incidentally, going back to Russia, from none other than Deutsche Bank, the German bank, who's been, one of the big players on Wall Street for a long time. And as I've said in a previous truth bomb, they've been involved with all sorts of fraud schemes going back to the railroad era of the United States. I mean, this is information that most people don't fully understand or recognize, and it was incredibly beautiful and brilliant that Rachel Maddow put together this monumental podcast to reveal all. But what I'm trying to pick up on, and what I think Rachel Maddow was going to and hasn't yet, and this is probably going to be a part of season 2 of Ultra, and I have been very critical of Rachel Maddow because Rachel Maddow doesn't know the information that I have. But I always thought that was because she's really the director of the communications of the Wall Street revolving door meritocracy in corporate America that have their own power grab and have forever. I mean, that's pretty much what we've been going back to Reagan, Bush, Clinton. I mean, that's Wall Street, if you want to know the truth. But in this particular scenario, and what I've said over and over and over in terms of what the revolution is this global white supremacist Christo-nationalist effort that's really fueled, I believe, by none other than Vladimir Putin, because I think he learned and knew all of the things that Rachel Maddow is now picking up on. And I'd like to know who actually keyed her onto this. Was it somebody inside the CIA? Was it somebody who, a history buff? Did she find it on her own? I doubt it, because I was also critical of her before I watched Ultra, a movie that came out last year that I've been very incredibly high on, that I say throughout all my truth bombs, I hope you'll find and I'll hope you'll watch. But it was directed by one of the most brilliant directors in Hollywood, a guy by the name of David O. Russell, even though I know he's got all sorts of problems on a personal level. But David O. Russell, starring three fabulous actors, Margot Robbie, Christian Bale, and John David Washington, in this period piece right after World War I that was leading into World War II, where these guys, it's called Amsterdam. And ultimately, their characters figure out that there's this sort of coup in the United States that's working with the Nazis, that's actually being financed, and there's a collaboration, there's an alliance with American industrialists. And they do that in a sort of, fictional depiction. But yeah, anybody who knows American history understands that Henry Ford, the father of the assembly line, I mean, that was his offering and that his great masterpiece of work, but he was also virulently anti-Semitic. And he was all in on, everything that Hitler was all about. And he wasn't the only one. And so what they present, David O. Russell, in this great masterpiece called Amsterdam, is that not only do you have the industrialists, right? So the way they set it up in the movie is like one guy might be a steel baron. I think the other guy might be, I don't know if he was like an auto manufacturer. I think he was. I think he was an auto manufacturer, which of course, would go on to create the massive weaponry that the United States was able to do because of our industrial capacity at the time, after we figured out through none other than on the economic side, Keynesian economics, to be able to fund it all in the ramp up to World War II. All of this stuff was going on. And what David O. Russell portrays and what Margot Robbie was absolutely brilliant, and so was John David Washington and also Christian Bale. They were freaking brilliant, man, in this movie. You've got to see it to believe it, because it does capture the essence of what I'm all about. For those of us who do believe in liberty and justice for all and dynamism and all of the things that matter, and family and our animals and, orcas and the sort of sustainability of the world and science and things that we can progress to make, in order to form a more perfect union, those types of people are like this with me. That's what we're all about. And I was beginning to make those connections with you guys when at the top, and this is what I was going to say about that corollary in terms of the movie. Oh, by the way, Robert De Niro is in that movie, and he does play General Dudley. Was that General Dudley? Anyway, based on a real life character that went through this stuff. This is all relatively hidden history of the United States, right? This is the stuff that Rachel Maddow picked up in her glorious podcast Ultra that she's revealing. But I thought, man, she's riding the coattails, and she's like going into the scenario that I continue, and I've said for probably about 400 truth bombs, that corruption births and fuels fascism. But then I think she got tipped off. She does this. I thought she was following, David O. Russell, and I thought that she was kind of detracting from that, because I don't think the movie did great at the box office in a very hyper-competitive world, particularly in communications. But I'm like, why isn't she going after corruption that I'm aware of? And by the way, the last thing I got to say about this character was that, I said there was an auto manufacturer, arms manufacturer, like a steel magnet. This is in the depiction, the fictional depiction of David O. Russell's Amsterdam. But also there was a guy that was the sort of, trying to think of how to describe it. He was like the editor in chief of like the equivalency of the New York Times sort of thing. So you got the media wrapped up. So fast forward to 2024, or if you even go back to 2020, which is where I was going with Steve Bannon and Eric Prince and the lack of J6 investigation and understanding who was the real money that was behind this, because these guys had to have concocted this idea long ago. I don't know if Steve Bannon tried to revive what was going on in America First and kind of studied it and figured it all out and then laid it out in a roadmap with the billionaires and the industrialist, and then of course Papa Murdoch, because that's the other part of what I was trying to say in this analogy, that it was media through Fox that ultimately we saw just like 6 months ago pay $787 million in libel to get Dominion to shut up, because Papa Murdoch said their business model is to lie. But for what? They created the big lie. This is everything that we're seeing on X from Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and everybody else, from the standpoint that they're just projecting. When you see them talking about pedophiles, when you see them talking about all of these things that really basically stir up what they call their base, which I call the MAGA zombie apocalypse, who has no idea how things work, they've got to create fear. In this stage, it's like the trans, it's women, it's gays. It hasn't really gone full on Jew yet. Although I will say, 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last weekend. Last weekend, I saw Jimmy Dore, who's a part of this cabal that I'm guarantee is paid by Putin, and Alex Jones were like, oh yeah, and he had it. Jimmy Dore had an interview that really made the hair on the back of my what's left of it neck stand up because of Candace Owens talking about anti-Semitism and that it was the Jews that murdered all of the Christians in Russia, which is bullshit. It was Stalin. Was there a couple of Jews that might have been influential? Yeah, but it wasn't doing it because they were Jewish. They were doing it because they were communists and they wanted to murder religion. That was part of their freaking being, of which now all of these white Christo-fascists are now, Zeke Heiling, basically the Russian. This shit's insane. But going back to, the nature and the magnitude of Q with the NSA, with the billionaires and, the media and whatever industrialists, what did we just see happen over the course of the last week and a half? The Supreme Court. Everybody is losing their mind over the Supreme Court. And I got to tell you, I am too. But it's not like I didn't see it coming. But boy, did it put an exclamation point on everything that I have been revealing to you through now 502 truth bombs after the con, which is 6 hours, which took millions of dollars and years to put together. And then I did another 20 hours or 19 hours in my podcast, The New Untouchables. And I highly, highly encourage everybody that is watching this to share my stuff, to read my stuff. If you go immediately, to my X feed and you go and click on articles, you'll see in-depth analysis in the way I'm laying out what the Clean New Deal is, what this is all about, which is the fight for liberty and justice for all, which is really the ultimate populist crusade to purge the misery of tyranny, to create the renaissance of possibility. And the key ingredient to this whole thing is what I continue to tell you, that I'm the only person in the country that's willing to say it, or the world. And by the way, I do got to give a shout out to all of my friends in, my God, people all over the world, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, people in Argentina, South Africa, and then, of course, all of the United States, and some of my best friends online that have discovered me in a very little while. I mean, we don't know each other from Adam. I refer to them as best friends because we're joined in the heart and in the mind. We understand what's at stake and what's going on. And when people find me, they're like, oh my God, where have you been? And I've got, people in Maui and people in Florida and people in New York. It's growing, but I got sabotaged again because I laid out there that Brian Stetler should be tarred and feathered. Meanwhile, again, put that against what you see from Alex Jones and all of these other bozos, Marjorie Taylor Greene, when they're basically using hate speech and violence every second of every day. And they're not the ones doing it. They're programmed. The idea is this guy, Prigozhin and RRA, created troll farms and bots to create as much, cancerous metastasization of, people at each other's throats to create confusion, because that's how intelligence post-Cold War has worked between the geopolitical chess game between Russia, i.e. KGB, and the CIA. This is a new wrinkle. And the big wrinkle really, dominoes because of all of the things that happened and are happening in Ukraine. But of course, the stuff that's happening in the theater in Israel, and then, whatever comes next, not to mention Taiwan. I mean, we're looking at global, fissures and, tremors, the likes that we haven't seen since World War I. And this stuff could domino really quick. And the difference is, of course, what? We've got enough nuclear weapons that can decimate the human race 10 times, 1,000 times, a million times over, when we might be the only life that exists in the entire universe. That was my last truth bomb. But going back to the nature and the magnitude of the moment and why you have to understand why you and me have to connect and we have to align. And I like to say this a lot because this is kind of my own Zen, right? If your ideology is not in line with your actions, you're in disarray. And that's what most of us on the so-called progressive Democratic side are. And quite frankly, I could go on and on about, fake Republicans and the idea of conservatism, or Christians that believe in Jesus that are doing just the opposite of what all of these sorts of ideologies are all about, because it's really just about white supremacy and fascism. And what is fascism? It's just an extreme, hard right, patriarchal, top down, everybody get in line and do what the boss tells you. And that's how they control the situation. Because, as I mentioned in my last truth bomb as well, LBJ, a white Texas, president that followed the assassination of JFK, had told us long ago that if you can convince the lowest rung white guy that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung black guy, you can pick his pockets all day. That's what this strata is. That's what it's always been. That's what, aristocracies are. Okay. It's always control the masses and then ultimately religion, so that people don't explore what the mysteries of the universe are and the fantastic zen of creation and all of the rest of it, in terms of this hyper insane universe that is infinite because it was born from the singularity and all of that stuff. That's just as crazy as any notion of God, quite frankly. But it's control is what I'm trying to tell you. And so ultimately you've got the Ben in one of the buckets that I wanted to address. All things what's happening with Trump that involves Biden, because we know that all of the Democrats are in disarray right now because we've been served up Biden for a long time, that he's healthy. He looked great in the State of the Union address. And then we saw the debate with Trump, which I think I about fell out of my chair. And obviously, so did everybody else. It is so clear. And I know a lot of people are like, look, like me, I said I would vote for Joe if he were dead. It kind of reminds me of this whole episode in the end of season 1 of, House of Dragons, where the Targaryen king, was on his deathbed, and I think his face was basically, molting right in front of our eyes, where he was, transforming it into a skeleton. I mean, I'm thinking about that character on his deathbed being Joe Biden, and I'd still vote for him over Donald Trump. But is that what we're going to see? It looks to me like the donor class, the New York Times, Rachel Maddow. I mean, there was an op-ed in the New York Times the day after the debate that said that Biden's got to relinquish his role. And so that the question becomes, okay, well then who's in line? Well, we know Vice President Kamala Harris, and there's all sorts of problems that come with there, and I'll address them real quick. Kamala Harris is sharp. She's a prosecutor. She's an African-American woman who obviously comes from mixed religious and background, maybe projects this sort of multi-dimensional, multicultural sort of thing in the United States, which, I would love, quite frankly, if it wasn't for the fact that I knew that she was also working for, basically, as AG of California, Wells Fargo. And she was hand in hand with Trump's former Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, that ultimately destroyed millions of millions of Californians in the collapse of the housing market. And California was probably the worst. And if you go into my New Untouchables, I've really got amazing information on Kamala Harris and what happened in the state of California, which is beyond your comprehension in the stuff that we're seeing with Donald Trump involvement right now. But ultimately, Kamala Harris was a part of that. Okay? As was Barack Obama. That's the whole point. The choices that the Obama administration made is what ultimately betrayed the United States, because we let Wall Street get away with the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended and made Trump inevitable. And Kamala Harris was a part of that. So the other potential that we're seeing from the Democratic Party is none other than Gavin Newsom. And that would probably make a lot of sense because he's running a huge state. We've seen all over he's Fox's enemy number one. They've all been projecting that he's probably going to be the guy that's going to follow Biden. But is there enough time for him to make a platform? It shows the ridiculousness of having crowned Biden initially without at least having, the debates and what we've normally gone through with the ramp up, which I mentioned in my declaration for the Clean New Deal. I lay it all out. There's a picture on it. You can see it in my articles. It's been seen by, or viewed by 226 views at this stage of the game. I don't know what the analytics are, but what I say in that truth bomb is that, look, normally in any election cycle, we have the primaries to where candidates duke it out. They create a position and a vision based on what's going on. Then, through some manner, shape, or form of combination of, those that appear to have, a better reaction through focus groups and everything else with the American people and what they're saying is resonating. They get to go through the process, and then the donors come on, and then potentially they become the candidate for the party. That's the way it's always worked. That's not the way it worked this year, because it was a foregone conclusion for both, even though we did see Republicans, in primaries, which was a joke in its own right, because they were all still kissing the ring of Donald Trump. But the bottom line, it's been a foregone conclusion that Trump was going to be the Republican candidate and Joe Biden was going to be the Democratic candidate. And like I've said in millions of truth bombs before, this is the ultimate manifestation of the fact that what we're dealing with is the power that's had control for the last 50 years that ultimately serves the baby boomer generation is holding on like, and I always screw this up when I think about his name, and I don't know why I can't think of his name. He was Moses, and he was the head spokesperson for the NRA, and he's like, they're not coming after our Second Amendment, with my cold dead hands. I mean, when you look at Mitch McConnell, and quite frankly, everybody that's been in Congress or the Senate for years and years and years, man, they hold on to the bitter end. If we're thinking that Joe Biden looked crazy in the debate, how many of you saw Mitch McConnell freeze up on the floor, the Senate? Same kind of thing. I mean, these guys are geriatric, right? Because they've been hanging on forever, and there becomes a point with vanishing, returns. But at the same time, they don't represent we the people. They represent the system that's manifested what it is that you find in all of my revelatory material that reveals that after the 2008 great financial crisis, that we blew up the world through fraud that was monumentally larger than anything Donald Trump has done or is guilty of or is being, revealed through all of the elements of what the sum total of all of the, indictments reveal, simply because what they're revealing to us is that he defrauded the United States using deceptive acts and practices, using electioneering in this electioneering scheme by falsifying names and records that he's been doing in his business records forever, that he used the same methodology in trying to steal the election. And again, I don't think he masterminded it, because can you imagine Donald Trump shelling out his money to all of the goons that are the muscle that probably came out of friends of the court, so to speak, that came out of Blackwater, and that involved all of these different mercenaries and / cops that showed up from different precincts around the United States, which is also the ultimately scary thought for me, because as we've seen with Donald Trump on this campaign, even after he was convicted of 34 felony convictions, right, to defraud the United States using deceptive acts and practices with the intent to steal the election. Okay, that's first and foremost. But ultimately, he's shaking hands with cops all over the United States on the tarmac where, Trump won, is, by the way, parked next to whatever that huge Russian plane was that we saw all over X the last couple of days, in making some sort of handshake deal with whoever the go-to is. I mean, this thing has been going on forever. So to recap, before I get into the second and third buckets, which I'll try to close as quickly as possible. So first and foremost, Patrick Lovell is the muckraking journalist that put together the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that the $90 billion a year apparatus of the Department of Justice, the Federal Reserve, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Office of Thrift Supervision, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and AGs around the country couldn't do. And they've got tens of thousands of employees. Yeah, I did it with my team. And that's called The Con at www.thecon.tv. And the reason, again, that beyond it just being important because the blueprint of how this whole thing works, the Supreme Court of the United States, in one of its many decisions this past week, has said to the American people that we're getting rid of the administrative state, and you can't have, all of these huge law firms that are going to be working the deals behind the scenes, which lead to the type of things that followed the 2008 great financial crisis with the nature of, statement of facts, and nobody admits guilt, and the banks were the ones who did the problem, but not the bankers. All sorts of ludicrous type stuff that allows people to get away with massive white collar crimes, which under many of the different purviews include also Sarbanes-Oxley, which the Supreme Court said, no, you're not going to be able to use that anymore in trials, and we got to throw that out, by the way, which is another reason they're in their incredible, never-ending, quiver, like reaching for arrows here, quiver of being able to destroy liberty and justice for all through a country of for and by the people, because what they're doing is they're making it so that all of power has no accountability and that you can't investigate them. So what they're doing is they're putting a death knell into white collar investigations, which they already have because of the revolving door and all of the things that we show you in the con and so much more. And that goes for the Department of Justice. Hey, surprise, America. We're completely corrupt. That's why I say corruption births and fuels fascism. But so in addition to this workaround, not only did the Supreme Court completely make the Civil War like it didn't happen because they didn't enable the Constitution with the very easiest language in the history of the world to understand through, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that says if you're involved with an insurrection, you can't run for the office of the United States. Again, was J6 an insurrection based on the definition of insurrection? Did you see thousands of Trump supporters, i.e. MAGAs, go on a tour, a peaceful tour where they expressed, their grievances? No, they had weapons. Do they have guns? I'm sure a lot of them did. I've seen nonstop this incredible attack from Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and so on and so forth, that, the FBI pulled this whole thing in a bait and switch. Yeah, maybe there was some of that involved. I don't know. I haven't done the deep dive on the whole thing, but I can tell you what I saw from my own eyes. A lot of people went in with weapons and bats and this and that, and they went with the intent to kick ass. Which when I watched it first, the J6, I was scratching my head and I had hair at the time. And I was like, after everything that I have seen, that the financial system of this country destroyed tens of millions of Americans using the exact same tactics. And I'm telling you that Donald Trump has been investigated, indicted, and eventually would have been convicted if it wasn't for the corruption of the Supreme Court, which then leads to what? I mean, we know Dobbs. Okay, I'll address Dobbs in a moment. But in terms of Chevron, okay, what is that all about? That corporations, multinationals can do whatever they want. They can poison the air, the water, the land, whatever, man. No EPA, get rid of it. The money is what matters. That's what matters. Money is king. Gold, he who has the gold makes the rules. What I've been telling you in all of these truth bombs, in the very most common sort of, cultural reference I can think of, is it's all Game of Thrones. And so this is all a battle for the Iron Throne, because if you get the Iron Throne, you get the Iron Bank. And of course, you get all the military. Okay? That's what they're doing. But in a democracy, that's not what's supposed to happen, because you have separation of powers and you have accountability through investigations, which the Supreme Court is gutting. And who's led the charge on this whole thing? A son of slaves, an African-American Uncle Tom by the name of Clarence Thomas, married to Jenny Thomas, who is a warrior for the Koch brothers and all things that they've been involved with for decades, which they're at the top of the heap when it comes to actual knowing how to play the Game of Thrones. Nobody does it better than the Koch brothers. There's a couple of pretenders coming up the scale in the background, like maybe Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo and all of these other guys that have been in there that are connected to some John Birch society that I know about. Kudos to ProPublica for bringing all of that information to light over the course of the last year and a half. Where were you, New York Times, on all of that, which is amazing. But the bottom line is that we have seen that there was millions of dollars paid in a variety of ways to Supreme Court justices like Alito to end up flying the signal, the bat signal, the upside down American flag and distress signal to his fellow insurrectionists while ruling on the insurrection. It's corruption in every single direction. And tech is a part of this, because if you give Donald Trump and the presidency the ability to be the king, And he relies on all of the oligarchs around the world to provide him billions of dollars to run campaigns to get. Who's he on the hook to? The American people or billionaires? Well, he's a billionaire himself, I think. I don't know where he is today. He still owes $1 billion, like Biden was able to kind of dribble out, but he couldn't finish his thoughts on time because all Trump did was lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. And neither, these two morons from CNN, going back to the entirety of CNN, they've been playing this game forever to pretend like, yeah, there's two equal voices in this discussion, and the American people are just going to have to sort it out themselves. No, what they've done forever is they've hired PR. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, which was great. Thank You for Smoking. These freaking diabolical, evil, mad geniuses in communication that basically sell a bag of goods to basically pull the wool over the American people's eyes. So you can't see the forest for the trees. And all power has done this for now decades. And this is why I had to make the con, because I lived it, because it destroyed my life initially and led me to things that I've revealed that you'll discover if you read all of my articles, or if you take a look at my series, or if you listen to anything that I put out there. But ultimately, I had to understand and become the investigator to where I had to actually reconfigure my mind to understand what actually is going on, because it's all antithetical to everything that we think we are, which is nobody's above the law, and that we live in an equal society where everybody has a fair shot to get to where they want to go, and it's all incumbent upon us. No, that's not what's been going on for a variety of reasons, but ultimately the most important reason of all for you to wrap your head around is because after the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, that was lying, stealing, deceiving, and organized crime at a level that would make your head spin, and you can see it in the blueprint and the con and hear all about it in the new Untouchables, that led to, and again, tens of millions of people being rug pulled. Borrowers who had no reason to be able to ever be into getting a house based on the underwriting criteria, but they did anyway. They were loaded up with loans that were designed to fail, that then went up the food chain, that would ultimately destroy investors and pensioners all around the world, many of whom are retired white working class who came out of 4 or 5 decades of working to retire. And instead of living in peace where they could watch their grandchildren play baseball and do, apple pie and all the stuff that we expect to do on July 4th, no, they got their lives destroyed. And now they're waving MAGA flags because they're like, that was the Wall Street meritocracy, Democratic revolving door, internationalist cabal that Alex Jones wants to, blame for everything. When meanwhile, Alex Jones is just squealing like a pig for Putin, who's created this internationalist cabal of white supremacy, Christo-fascism, and laying out the same sort of methodologies through all of the characters that I've mentioned so far that are basically running the gauntlet. And I have yet to mention Project 2020-25 that everybody's paying attention to, of which you can see one of my most read articles that I address this from the Heritage Institute. But this was all part of the play. When I refer to the Americans for Prosperity and the Koch brothers being the most diabolical and genius when it comes to actually, selling a bag of goods to people that are trustworthy, that want to live in the society that we all think we are, but yet pulling the rug on them for their own benefit, that's what this diabolical cabal does. Going back to David O. Russell's Amsterdam, when industrialists, they're not waving the flag for red, white, and blue. They're like, whoever's going to win. And they put all their chips on Hitler. And they were never held accountable. And they've always been there since. And now here we are, with a guy who's from South Africa via Canada, Elon Musk, who I thought was going to change the world because he's a genius and he gets into, 42 and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and many other things that I have referred to throughout this whole time period. But ultimately, becomes this guy who is a platform that Joseph Goebbels would be impressed by. And they've been shutting me down because of all of the information that I've been putting out there. And so the Democratic Party at the moment doesn't have somebody that we can all collectively look at and go, that person's going to change the game. He's going to run away with blowing up Trump, because doesn't it seem like the only person who could lose to Trump right now is Biden? I know many people are saying that, but at the same time, like I said earlier, that I'd vote for a dead Joe Biden over Donald Trump any day and twice on Sunday. But do we think that Biden's going to even make it? Honestly, I've got my doubts. He did not look good in that debate. And if you think that he did and he was sick and everything else, I mean, come on. He had no strength. He had no dynamism. He couldn't finish a thought. He couldn't. I mean, this is complicated stuff, but he couldn't meet Trump head on. If I were Trump, and I said this in a couple of truth bombs that got like over 300,000 views so far, I would have dropped Trump with the glass jaw sucker that he is. I would have pummeled Trump. I would have destroyed Trump on all things Dobbs. I would have destroyed Trump on all things, everything he's been involved with Saudi and Putin, not to mention all of the nature and the magnitude of the stuff with the insurrection, with all of the aforementioned, with Steve Bannon and Eric Prince and the Mercers and everything else, not to mention the Saudis who were involved with being able to make 9/11 become what it was, because it was 15 hijackers out of Saudi Arabia that were funded by, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, whose wife was giving him wire transactions so that they could have the sleeper cells in the United States. Oh, yeah, by the way, that the CIA and the FBI knew about, but apparently they weren't talking to each other because Liz Cheney's dad, Dick Cheney, who was the CEO of Halliburton, didn't want that. That's how it works. When you want to try to stick a steel grade into the engine of democracy, you put some characters that are corrupt at the top of the game and they can control the outcome. Because otherwise our agencies are funded like you would not believe. And they could have put an end to the guys that created 9/11 in a nanosecond. But 24 years later, has Saudi lost any power? Recently, we just saw that Saudi apparently just pulled itself off of the dollar oil standard. I don't know what kind of like ramifications that's going to have in the next 6 months, but I'm sure it's going to be monumental because the BRICS countries are positioning for the fall of the United States. And they want, honestly, a dictator who is like Trump to be able to keep the power for themselves. Just like all of the corrupt corporations and the CEOs that created the control fraud that buried over 30 million Americans and upwards of 100 million people worldwide through the great financial crisis, that ultimately walked after they destroyed everybody with $71 trillion illegally. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. I just happened to say last night in my response, and this is the third bucket that I've got to address, and then I'll be finished. Thanks for tuning in. This is only the mother of all truth bombs, and we're nearing the 4th of July, and I'm kind of reminded of Will Smith. Probably a lot of people aren't big fans of Will Smith because of what happened at the Academy Awards, but Will Smith in Independence Day, right? When they're basically like, no, they throw down the gauntlet, to saving the world. And that's what we have to do now. And last night, Rachel Maddow has this go-to interview with Stormy Daniels. And the entirety of the setup, even though it was incredibly awkward, and quite frankly, a lot of things I could personally be dismissive of, but yes, there was a lot of humanity from Stormy, particularly as it relates to the fact that her daughter is being harassed, she's being harassed, she's getting threats from all of the maggots that they're going to rape their entire family. And the thing that Rachel was pointing out was that Trump and his goons have been able to create a situation where, they're potentially going to have Stormy's partner's house foreclosed upon, and I don't know what all the details of that were, but they got leverage. Then, they've been harassing her like crazy because she told the truth about her relationship, that led to obviously the 34 convictions. But Rachel Maddow's positioning is like, okay, look, if Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States, then what's happening to Rachel or to Stormy can happen to all of us. Now, I personally think that Rachel's speaking from a first-person scenario there, because I think Rachel Maddow recognizes that if Donald Trump becomes president, because he's said this the whole time, that he's going to be your retribution. Well, I think probably high on the list of retribution is going to be Rachel Maddow. And I think the hens of MSNBC are worried. I'll tell you that Lawrence O'Donnell is, the calm in the storm. And that guy has been delivering knockout blow of MAGA, and he'll never cease to. And he's showing no fear for MAGA, and nor will he. But the rest of the hens are, and I'm not using that to be disparaging, but they are, because I do consider Rachel Maddow the communication director of the Democratic Party. And, she's telling everybody, look at Stormy. Now, meanwhile, and there was a hashtag going on that we are all Stormy. Now, I did my last um, tweet last night that is going to have to last and hopefully spread the word if you go in and start spreading like crazy. And I hope many, many, many of you will be compelled to finally think to yourself after you put all of this stuff together and hear what I'm saying, that Patrick Lovell has the answers that can take all of this down and become the centrifugal force, which I call the Big Bang of truth. If you become a vector for the truth, to work around the Borg and all of this massive betrayal and deception of all of the power in the country from billionaires around the world and the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, this is monumental grade 5, code red people who've ever believed in democracy and the rule of law and integrity, so that, yeah, we can go watch our kids and our grandkids, or, be a kid on a baseball field in the United States, safe, to be able to compete fairly and have, apple pie and hot dogs, and everything is cool, right? That's the country that I grew up with. Yeah, there was definitely flaws, but what we're in the midst of right now is going to a place that none of us wants to imagine. But anybody who's been around and seen what's happened around the world, particularly as it relates to World War II, can't even fathom. But you better start getting on the stump quickly to understand that if you do not act, and if you do not help me get this information out there, then they're going to bulldoze us, and there's no turning back, and we're going to lose the freedom and liberty for the rest of our lives. And I'm willing to go the distance, and I'll battle any MAGA and any diabolical betrayer of liberty and justice, and I'm ready to go, let me tell you. But I know that we can beat them with the information that we have if we can get it in the minds of the tens of millions of people, because you got to understand, in terms of the heroism of so-called Stormy Daniels, right? The way I look at Stormy's story was that Stormy was in her own words, a porn star who was directing at the time when Trump entered her life. And he made this sort of proclamation that it was like, hey, I'd like to have you as an ongoing guest, not guest, but an ongoing personality on my television show, The Apprentice. I would have loved to have seen the executive producer, Mark Burnett's face if Trump marched Stormy Daniels in there and said, hey, I want her to be on the show. Mark would be like, what? What are you talking about? But Stormy bought it. She bought it. She was looking for a transaction. And as I described in my truth bomb, it was like, look, and this is true of a lot of us, honestly. Let's just speak truth here, okay? Sometimes when people get into a transactional relationship, they both get off on it, regardless of how demented or perverse or whatever, as long as they get something out of the deal. But Trump rug pulled her. He lied to her, and he never delivered, so she got suckered. Okay. He probably thought, she's a fucking porn star. I don't know her or anything. I'm just getting off. See ya. That's exactly what dudes like Donald Trump would do. And I don't sleep with porn stars, but I can certainly imagine the idea of like, yeah, just this is a transactional situation. But ultimately, Trump had done that with everybody in his life, whether it was the contractors or the workers that worked on all of his buildings in Manhattan, whether it was the investors in all of his silly stakes or university or you name it. He screwed everybody. He went bankrupt 6 times. He's a D- business guy and fraudster at that, which means he's a D- dictator. I think he'll come crumbling down in like the cascading avalanche that I know he's gonna fall. But I don't know when and how and what the circumstances are going to be. And I certainly hope I'm the guy that cascades it all, because again, Donald Trump screwed everybody. Or as I said in my truth bomb, or I should say my post, he fucked everybody, and I spelled it FCKED, right? So I don't spell it out, so I wouldn't get arrested by X for doing so. But he has, no matter who it is, he's betrayed everybody. And yet there's tens of millions of maggots that I call the zombie MAGA apocalypse spreading Trump contagion. Again, it's not the mind woke virus, it's the MAGA zombie apocalypse spreading Trump contagion. Because everybody's lying to that. The reason Rachel Maddow hasn't connected with the millions of people that got crushed by the 2008 great financial crisis is because she chose to tell the story of 6 scenarios of elector fraud scheme of changing signatures on the electoral college in swing states to try to swing the election of one of many different elements of the insurrection that was taking place at that time. Meanwhile, the information I'm giving you is that there were tens of millions of illegal documents used to set up tens of millions of Americans in loans they didn't understand, and loans that they could never afford if they understood the blueprint. And ultimately, when it did fail, because of the nature of the train wreck of what took place in our financial markets and also in our housing calamity, the powers that be, that included the judiciary and the entirety of attorneys, used fake signatures and perjury to steal millions of people's homes. Sorry, Rachel, if they're not actually giving you the adulation or the loyalty that you seek at the moment, because you turned your back on them. You turned your back on me. Same with everybody else for that matter. That's why I had to make the con, because I knew there was some bullshit happening in Dodge. And I knew that they were pissing on my head telling me it's rain. And I knew that the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist because of who I am and where I come from. And I've got that all over my 400 or 502 truth bombs. And then ultimately, I put it all together. And in fact, I put it all together not because I'm such a smart guy, but because I had the wherewithal in the, capacity to recognize when I heard William K. Black miraculously on the Sunday morning talk show, Bill Moyers, sometime in 2010-ish, I think, tell us what was going on. And I was like, oh my God, that guy knows the truth. And when I started to understand who William K. Black was, and he was the guy that put together the 30,000 plus criminal referrals to take out all the elite scumbag bankers of the savings and loan era, including, the CEO of Continental Savings, whose name eludes me at the moment because I'm just going off on a tangent. But I'll tell you this, the guy that came out of Lincoln Savings, who was just talking, which was the largest bankruptcy that ever happened in the United States and the world at that time, the economist that was supposed to prevent all of that from happening was none other than, for those of you who don't know who our chairman of the Federal Reserves are, you're probably going to be like, who? Look it up. A guy by the name of Alan Greenspan, who became the king, quite frankly, of the Federal Reserve ever since, and what allowed all of this insanity to happen. The great financial crisis of 2008, otherwise called the subprime crisis, was just a continuation of what started with the savings and loan crisis, was involved with junk bonds, with Michael Milken and all of these other things, with the predator ball that would end up leading to the tech bubble of the 2000, and then ultimately the Enron era frauds, and then ultimately the great financial crisis. But because of all of that stuff, and by the way, that did emanate too from all of the stuff that was going on in Asia that destroyed the world, or that part of the world, in the late 90s, which was the same grift. But the guys that saved it all, that created the global currency of the dollar that's tied to the petrodollar, was Alan Greenspan and Larry Summers and Robert Rubin, who were all on the cover of Time magazine in 1998. Those were the guys that put this whole thing together that destroyed the world. And who did Obama put back in power and save? The same guys. So Stormy Daniels, she's gone through some really bad stuff. And I think they probably raised a lot of money on this fundraising, this GoFundMe thing. And she's probably going to be okay because of what Rachel Maddow did last night. But I think I would have preferred to see, Stormy own it and just basically just start richtering how stupid Donald Trump was. But, I just would like to have seen that. But anyway, given all the stuff that she's gone through, and hopefully, she's going to get through this and all the stuff that she's going on. But her being a caricature that we're all Stormy Daniels, look, I'm sorry. Stormy Daniels is not a hero. You're not a hero if you're a whore, even though circumstances might have created that scenario. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't call her a whore. She wasn't a prostitute. She was just a porn star. Hey, there's a big difference. I know, but she went in with an agreement that, hey, if she didn't get the contract and she didn't get it signed and she didn't get the commitment from Trump to be on The Apprentice and all of the rest of it, hey, that's called free market. It's called caveat emptor. Would we have ever heard from you if Donald paid you off and you became superstar? Probably not. You were pissed because he grifted you and he fucked you. Literally, I'm talking financially and all the rest of it, and the other stuff with the turtle dick and the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, whatever. Bottom line is, Stormy is not the hero, even though I empathize with her. Let me explain to you briefly who the heroes are that I connected with. So, for example, there was a guy by the name of Michael Winston, who was this, brilliant psychologist, PhD with more degrees than you could possibly imagine. He worked for all of these Fortune 500 companies who wound up at none other than Countrywide. And he started discovering that Countrywide was a grift shop based on all of the stuff that I've been revealing to you that led to this global calamity. And it was run by a CEO by the name of Angelo Mazzillo, who died last year. Angelo Mazzillo was this like ridiculous caricature. He looked like straight out of the mob, but he had this golden tan because he was in Malibu, driving around in a convertible, but he had the silver coiffed hair. And, he came from the Bronx and he's supposedly this self-made guy and this genius of the housing markets and yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, it was all a fraud shop. And Michael Winston decided to try to lay it out to try to take him down because he was going to take the information to the investors because that was his job. They called him the grill, that he was going to reveal to all of the different media that at the time had been saying that Countrywide was, like, for example, on the cover of the Forbes magazine, the 24,000% company. They had 24,000% growth in like several years leading up to the 2006, 7, 8 era, where Countrywide end up losing $20 billion, hemorrhage $20 billion of value in 1 year because the whole thing was built to collapse, what we show you in the con, based on control fraud, led by the CEO who created this massive grift through control fraud. And there's a methodology to the whole thing. But when the whole thing blew up, as it was blowing up, Bank of America bought these guys. And there's a lot of reason why Bank of America did it. But to put it into perspective, Bank of America ended up getting fined $40 billion for taking on the toxic assets of all things what Mozilla was running through Countrywide. And by the way, there's a famous moment for those of you who might remember this, where Michael Winston happens on this, this executive from the sales team that has Fundum on his Mercedes-Benz convertible, license plate. And Michael starts asking him questions, and he's like, Fundum. He's like, well, what if they don't have a job? Fund them. What if they don't have any education? Fund them. What if they don't have any assets? Fund them. And Michael was like, what? And that's what started his process. But ultimately, what ends up happening to Michael, as he's trying to make the world aware of the impending collapse that Angelo Mozillo is in the midst of, that led to all this insanity that I'm telling you, is one of 3,500 offices in this large campus building where it has this noxious, toxic plume of gas. Weird that he's the only one that this happened to. OSHA investigates it, which, by the way, OSHA is going to be slammed by the Supreme Court today anyway, I think, or sometime soon. But ultimately, he gets laryngeal cancer, Michael. And he ends up going through, I think I quoted 39 surgeries. I'm pretty sure it was 29 surgeries. Last time I talked to him, unfortunately, and I used to talk to him all the time, but he has, this mechanism coming out of his throat that allows him to talk. This guy's healthy his whole life. He's one of the most accomplished guys I've ever met. His family is tremendous. He's a gold standard, but he tries to do the right thing. And he ends up being silenced, literally. And by the way, I've read he's the only guy that got Angelo Mozillo, and I was going to put this into the con season 2, but I was never able to get around to it, to get Angelo Mozillo on the stand to answer questions about the things that he was revealing, that he had made the CEO and the board and the executive C-suite staff aware of what he was discovering when he did his own investigation. Mozillo gets up on the stand and basically tells the judge, you can't handle the truth. And he tells the jury that too. You can't handle the truth. One thing leads to another, and I've read that in the transcripts. One thing leads to another, and ultimately, Winston wins his civil fraud suit. He's awarded nearly $5 million. It gets kicked up to an appellate court and they reverse the decision, which never happens, not from a jury trial. But I bet you can actually kind of go, everything that I've just seen from Clarence Thomas and Kavanaugh and Alito and Roberts and everybody else, judges can be corrupt. Yeah. And that happened in the appellate court. And I learned that back in, let's see, it's 2019-ish, 2018-ish. And then I saw stuff in Florida like you wouldn't believe. Okay, on the other side of the country, same exact stuff. And then ultimately, another character in the con is a guy by the name of Dick Bowen, Richard Bowen. This amazing veteran of banking that goes back to the savings and loan crisis. And this guy's been, a top flight guy for a long time. And he gets these promotions to where he's like the top dog for Citigroup, the largest bank in the world, in the era of 2004 to 2008-ish. And his job is to basically look into the mortgage-backed security trust to make sure everything's meeting the reps and warranties of the guidelines of what Citigroup was selling to investors around the world, including pensions of teachers and all sorts of manner, shape of people that were being sold monumental weapons of mass destruction, to quote Warren Buffett, through the same methodology of what Michael Winston had discovered on the other coast, which wanted to be the Goldman Sachs of the Pacific, and they turned out to be just exactly that. I'm talking about countrywide. They were a feeder through the warehouse pipelines of millions and millions and millions and millions of toxic loans that were scheduled to blow up, that the hedge investment banks, all of the big ones, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, run it on down, that all have been absorbed in the too big to fail systemically important financial institution sense, that were all running the same racket because there was $70 trillion in global appetite for mortgage-backed securities. And so Wall Street designed a way to move through the conveyor belt of this massive, massive con, not just from a $4.5 trillion housing market, but ultimately through derivatives. If anybody's seen The Big Short, Margot Robbie in the bathtub trying to describe collateralized debt obligations and credit default swaps, that's what I'm referring to. They're bets on top of bets on top of bets on top of bets, all made with toxic assets. Once again, weapons of mass destruction from Warren Buffett. That everybody's gambling at the casino based on fraud, sawdust, bullshit. Donald Trump. That was Donald Trump's business model. That's how he knew how to use all of these, fake signatures and everything to try to steal the election alongside these goons from places like you to help it along. Why? Because as we see from Dick Bowen is like, wait a second, he starts to make his boss, and then his bosses know, and then he has to go to the board, and then ultimately the CEO of Citigroup at this time was none other than former Treasury Secretary, a gentleman by the name of Robert Rubin, who came out of none other than Goldman Sachs. And he was Treasury Secretary during the Clinton administration that created all of this deregulatory environment that put a death knell in what we learned from the Great Depression because of a gentleman by the name of Ferdinand Pecora, who I'm channeling through this whole thing, and that's a whole nother story. But that's the investigation to understand how things work. And so there was a $90 billion securitization of fraud that Citi was maneuvering to teachers and to steel workers and to pipe fitters and all sorts of other sorts of people that have been working class their entire life, to set them up, to destroy them. And you might think to yourself, well, wait a second, there's no way that's possible because they couldn't make any money doing that. They kept making money on the short term based on control fraud, which we show you in the con, but ultimately Bowen tried to end. And what happened to Bowen? He got unceremoniously fired. And what do we do in the con? What do we show you in the con, which is still news today? I went to the National Archives, where I literally opened up, which is a miracle in its own right, to the exact page through these incredible files of thousands and thousands of pages that you can't search for digitally based on name searches and everything else. I found exactly what we were looking for, which were the notes that came from the board of directors meeting between Robert Rubin and everybody, particularly a woman by the name of Beth Howard, who was, I think, the chief financial officer. And based on Sarbanes-Oxley, all of the senior executives have to sign off a disclosure that they attest, just like the robo-signers attesting to that they know all of the things in the documents. And that's another story for those of you thinking about this if you watch this. But they attest that all of the controls are sound. And the controls are all of this modus operandi, this business development, the machinery of the assembly line of fraud that Richard Bowen was showing them was leading to a $90 billion a year fraud scheme that was going to blow up. And they all turned their heads and they lied because he put Rubin on notice. He literally reached out directly to Rubin with the evidence. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff that happened after the fact where he got harassed, like Stormy, by security types and all sorts of weird methodology of people showing up at his house and his car. He had to look underneath his car because he thought it got, it was going to, get dynamited or like Prigozhin, like I said earlier. And he had to go through this whole time while his son's going through cancer and he's, basically losing his career trying to tell the truth. And ultimately, he has to go to all of the cops that include the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, but most notably, I don't know if you ever got to the FBI, but the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, and they all suborn this to protect the guilty. Okay? $90 billion a year, impacting millions of people. Same with Michael Winston. And then I could go on and on and on. They're all in the con. I've got like 20 of these guys. Not to mention my own story, which I laid up in my post last night. And so, look, man, yeah, am I rambling? Thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys share this like crazy. Look, what I'm telling you is everybody saw the disaster of 2008 coming that were professionals. They just got rug pulled like the rest of us by a corrupt apparatus because the fish rots from the head. And that's what the Supreme Court is telling us, that, look, there is no accountability to power, which is called treason. And we're about to celebrate July 4th, the celebration. And I don't know what percentage of MAGAs even know that we rebelled against King George III. Sorry for my, misstatement at the beginning about King Henry VIII. I would guess I was thinking about divorce from the Catholic Church, whatever. People, everything is on the line. Okay. And again, if you're tracking, if you're anybody who has spit and vigor, and if you're pissed about corruption, and if you're a woman who doesn't accept the idea that you're a second-class citizen, that if you get raped, that you can't abort and make decisions on your own body because this patriarchal, corrupt Supreme Court wanted to give religious theocracy the ability to control you because of the way you're designed, because of nature. If you think that's a fair playing field, then obviously, by all means, go with MAGA, right? You want to be controlled. You want to be forced to live a specific life. For those of you who are liberated, who are freaking, decent and beautiful and connected to dynamism and the spirit of learning and in order to form a more perfect union, man, let's freaking get on this. I call this hashtag the righteous grind because I've been carrying this goddamn boulder up to the back top of Everest by myself, pushing the $71 trillion truth backwards without shoes on. And I could certainly use about 10 million of you guys to help me, because what I'm trying, if we all push the boulder over, it's going to create an avalanche that's going to wipe out corruption. And that's what's creating all of this thing, because it's all a quid pro quo. Because what is, getting rid of Dobbs do and reversing it to the states for Roe? That's a Heritage Foundation, religious theocracy. And then ultimately, if you're against, let's say systemic prisons, and the state's working out a situation where the federal government is paying for what? Systemic racism and all the things that led to Black Lives Matter. I can assure you, because I'm working on another project, that it's not just black guys that got shot in the back. Even white guys did, by cops. And do I think cops are bad? All cops are bad? Hell no. I know a bunch of cops. I know a lot of great cops, but I also know that there's cops that, they do what they're told, just like guys in the military. You got to follow orders. And ultimately, we've seen these cops out on the tarmac shaking hands with a felon, a 34 convicted felon who, unfortunately, we just saw that, the scheduling for his sentencing has been kicked down to September. Should have happened like in the next couple of days. That's another thing that's like, what? No, Trump's got to go to prison. He has got to go to prison. I don't know what kind of tricks somebody's got up their sleeve, but if he doesn't go to prison, game over. He's got to go to prison. And by the way, if you check out my Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Kind, you'll see like 3 or 4 truth bombs back. You'll see on the thumbnail, I have a conversation with David K. Johnston and William Black, who reveal, why Trump has to go to prison. I mean, this isn't hyperbole. This isn't something that we're saying contextually because we're afraid that, this king and this, this overthrow and all. No, just the law. He broke the fucking law. And he's been breaking the law for 4 decades and he was never held accountable. You think it's going to help to not jail him now? Just for the sake of jailing him now so that people can get inspired because everybody's like, game over, man. It's so rigged that nobody can do anything about it. Bullshit. We can fight back like crazy, unified by the tens of millions. If you become a nuclear vector for truth, for the Big Bang that I'm following, that I'm laying out there, that works around the board, so that can you do hashtag Free Patrick Lovell on Twitter? Because of the nature of all the things that Elon Musk is definitely bottling me up, because I'm a threat to Elon Musk. And I said this last night, and this is my last play. Look, guys. I've sacrificed everything to get here. I've lost so much that I can't even begin. And I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but I have sacrificed everything for liberty and justice for all. I really have. Did I think there was an upside to it? You bet your ass I did, because I wanted to be the guy that goes down in history as the guy that made tens of millions of dollars taking it to the freaking corrupt. Because on the other side of this, I've got the $71 trillion truth. Do you think $71 trillion to not convicted, but criminals and the largest racketeering scheme in history is the best way to spend money of the United States government? I'm not a socialist, guys. I've never been a socialist. I believe in a hybrid, and I've said this in many of my truth bombs, a hybrid, government where, of course, we have the military, we have police, we have firemen, we have different apparatuses, we build roads. Yes, of course, there's a version of socialism that makes sense, that gets funded by our fiscal budgets out of Congress as the power of the purse. Do I think that, that should make everybody subjugated to the same playing field and that nobody could rise, to see a villainy, to be able to, find the greatest solution to a disease or to a pandemic or, technology that, we all use or goes. No, man, there's got to be a free market scenario, as there has been for thousands of years. People have to hustle, but you don't want a racketeering enterprise that's got a monopoly to control everything, because that in its own right is fascism. Monopolies are not capitalism. And we're not a capitalist country, just like we're not a democracy. Look, guys, we're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism, the full faith and the credit of the United States, to fund the mafiocracy, the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world, based on all of us combined, our future value and our consumption and all sorts of things that go with that in economics. But to do what? To guarantee the mafiocracy with no law, because the corrupt Supreme Court wielded that, because they're corrupt, and then ultimately to do what? Fuel fascism. Look, I didn't give you a PhD dissertation today. I know I rambled and I'm all over the place, but I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you that the system is upside down, inside out, and I have the access to the people that can get in there and turn this around and right side up to where we can fumigate the parasites and the pimps and the whores and the junkies that have manifested and are thriving in the bloated, dead well carcass of the dead American dream. This is all about the Clean New Deal, where we get rid of we create a new Glass-Steagall. I'll teach you all about that. We got to get rid of Citizens United, which is legalized corruption. But guys, we got to completely reboot. Again, given the climate problem, given everything that's going on, this is a double down of everything that happened during 9/11 forward. It's the last 20 years on overdrive. There's been a global war against the people waged by the global oligarchy. honestly. And are you expendable? I'm not. The time to turn the table is now. It's the 4th of July. It's the 248th year anniversary of the birth of our nation that kicked King George III back across the pond, even though he never saw any combat, of course. It doesn't work that way. Certainly, all of the power through the Red Army and the Royal Navy and the Parliament and all things taxation is exactly what manifested all of that, which we had incredible character and courage where people were going to lose their lives. They knew if they signed on, they would lose their lives. They would be hung for treason. And they said, fuck you, King. We're the United States of America. This is what I know about Stormy and the rest of it, right? One thing I'm absolutely convinced of, and I've always been convinced of this my whole life, going into the whole story of the American Revolution, into the Civil War, into Pearl Harbor, the war on fascism, civil rights, so on and so forth. Americans don't lay down when they're getting fucked. It's time to do some fucking. And not violently. The righteous grind. The righteous grind. Guys, I've laid out in my truth bomb riffs what we have to do. We have to gather in Washington, D.C. by the millions, where I lay out all of this information in a much more entertaining way, where everybody gets to know the ABCs of what we are, how and why. And am I running for president? No. Martin Luther King wasn't running for president. He was running to make us live up to what we put down on paper. I'm doing a similar thing to save our democracy because we're disastrously, perilously closer to fascism than I've ever seen, even though I've said that we're a corporate fascist state forever. Fascism even takes it a bit further. And we can't allow that to happen. No. But if you've got $71 trillion in the knowledge of who did what, when, and how, and you cleanse the whole system, do you think that there's a chance to reconfigure budgets to deal with all of the problems that we have? Do you not think that we have enough brain power in the United States, enough people at every sector to be able to figure out how to create a new grid, which from what I understand would be somewhere in the $7 trillion range, not 70 trillion? But it creates productive capacity. And what is the value of the dollar anyways? What is the debt? I've addressed all of those things, but it is fiat currency. But it's in the hands of the corrupt. It's fiat currency, the full faith and credit of the United States for the criminals. And now they've completely bought SCOTUS. Guys, it's a sabotage that I've never seen before, even though I've been seeing it play out the entire time. But it was the exclamation point of the spokesperson for the Heritage Foundation that I happened to post right before I got eclipsed on Twitter this morning, where this white guy who's bald like me, and he says, hey, look, this doesn't have to be a bloodbath. Liberals just need to accept the terms of what we're shoving down their throats, which is corruption and calamity, and that you're a slave. Are you? Look, my face messed up. I don't know. I don't look all the great. I probably going to watch this with embarrassment. I don't care. I went to the lake yesterday. My mouth tastes like lake water. I had this sunburn. I don't know if that's, distracting. Maybe you can make fun of me. I have no idea. July 4th, summertime, I'm dressed a certain way. Look, I got my shirt on. Bob Marley, get up, stand up. Right? Get up, stand up. What was he telling him? Get up, stand up. Now, please share this like our democracy, the future of the world, and everything depends on it, because it does. When the people are united, we can never be defeated. This is the movement to purge corruption, to destroy tyranny, misery of tyranny, to create a renaissance of possibility. Failure is not an option. rise, roar, revolt, spread the word. Truth is marching. This is the con laid bare so that everybody understands the emperor's new clothes and really badass. It's going to take millions of us to break the bonds of corruption, bondage. It's no different than any other time in history. It's just our turn. And we have to do it. And we have to do it while we still have a peaceful potential to recreate what we have to do. And I should say this is the final thing I want to say. Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden. Look, depending on his health, the way I look at the Biden administration, honestly, he's done some great things. He's been around forever. I know all the flaws that he's been involved with for the last 4 decades. But Joe Biden is a better candidate than Trump, even in his worst possible condition. However, you do have to understand that Blackrock is running the show. I don't think Blackrock really cares if it's Biden or Trump. They're going to be in control anyway. Okay? But think of this movement, really. If we were to vote for Joe Biden, and let's just say we leveraged our knowledge against Joe Biden, and I can assure you, and I've said this in many of my truth bombs, that Beau Biden, his son, knew everything that I am telling you. He's on the record for, basically saying the exact same thing I am. And Beau absolutely cherished Joe cherished his son, Beau. Not that he doesn't Hunter. Obviously, Hunter's been an embarrassment, has had all sorts of problems, and he's stuck with them. And that's wild and good to see. It's unfortunate, but yeah, it is what it is. But I can promise you, Beau Biden knew all this stuff. And what I continue to think in my head is that, okay, if you can accept BlackRock to be like the power behind the machine, think of this movement as the power that'll guide Trump, but just BlackRock for the people instead of BlackRock for the top 0.001%. That's first and foremost. But second of all, if it's Gavin Newsom or if it's Kamala Harris, and again, I told you earlier on that Kamala Harris, played her role in this, and that's why she was promoted to VP to begin with. I'm absolutely certain of it. But you know what? It's a mess. It's a real mess. And I don't know about Gretchen Whitmer to be able to comment on her, but if millions of us are marching and we meet where we lay this whole thing out and we push back against the corrupt SCOTUS, the corrupt Congress, the corrupt Department of Justice, and Merrick Garland has failed us completely. But he's not the only one. Eric Holder sold us out completely. Bill Barr sold us out completely. Merrick Garland is just weak and responsible. Weak just like Biden, honestly. We need strength. I've got plenty of it to go around, I can assure you. I just need to inspire millions of you to have the same attitude. And if we land in DC and we do it by the millions and we get the attention and we get to the National Mall where we gather by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, underneath the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who said a country of by and for the people shall not perish from this earth, across from the reflecting pool where MLK said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. If we pick up our citizenship and our knowledge of liberty and justice for all and truth, and we converge where I lay out the details, and by the way, I think that William K. Black should be the Attorney General of the United States. That'd be probably the most important thing that the incoming president, who's not Trump, should do. But we got a lot of fixing and cleaning up to do, people. And the only way to do that is if literally tens of millions of us understand what's going on. Do you want to know what causes inflation, or your house, be out of reach, or you can't take care of your kids and all of those other kitchen table issues? It's because of what I'm telling you. And there's always more. All right, man. Happy July 4th. Happy Independence Day. This is the righteous grind, my friends. Please spread the word. Truth is marching onwards and upwards.